Sometimes you need an escape. Baseball and books and sports can do that for many people. Today we're going to talk to somebody who has experience in all those fields. Erik Sherman has been writing professionally since he was 14 years old. Several years after attending Emerson College in Boston, he began writing books. His first, Out at Home, with former Dodgers and A's outfielder Glenn Burke, who invented the high five and died tragically of AIDS, is currently being made into a movie by actress and producer Jamie Lee Curtis through Amazon Studios. Erik is also the co-author of 4 other highly acclaimed baseball autobiographies: A Pirate for Life with Steve Blass, the New York Times bestseller Mookie, Life, Baseball, and the 1986 Mets with Mookie Wilson, Davey Johnson, My Wild Ride in Baseball and Beyond, and the New York Times bestseller After the Miracle, The Lasting Brotherhood of the 1969 Mets with Art Shamsky, who we'll be talking to in a few weeks as well. Sherman is also the author of King of Queens, Life Beyond Baseball with the 1986 Mets. Erik is an annual lecturer at the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. We're thrilled to have him today, and if you want to take a look at any of these books, we highly recommend them. Welcome, Erik.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here today. I guess a lot of us are indoors, so it was easy.
Well, I appreciate it. And for me, baseball and books together really kind of take your mind away from everything, and it's an escape for hopefully a lot of people. So I thought, what better thing to talk about than baseball?
Yeah, especially since we don't have any baseball to watch this spring and for the foreseeable future. It's really strange. It's the first time we've really experienced this, I guess, since 95, the beginning of 95, when that strike of 94 kind of spilled over into the next spring.
Yeah. What is your take? I mean, what do you hear about once everything is, they give the go ahead to get back to things? How long do you think it will take for the teams to spring back into action, really?
Well, right now the date is May 10th. It's either May 10th or May 12th, where, we're supposed to be, well, past, I guess, what they call stage 2 of this, where, the worst is over. Hopefully we won't have any new coronavirus cases. We'll be dealing with what we have, and that's when baseball is supposed to return. Now, what does that mean? It could mean that they resume spring training. The players certainly are going to need at least a couple of weeks, I would think. I don't think we're going to see baseball before June 1st. That's just my feeling about it. We might not even see baseball until after the All-Star break. Maybe they'll do what they did in 1981 while they restarted the season back in 81 after that strike at the All-Star game. So they have the All-Star game and then they start the season. Maybe they'll do something like that. So, but I don't think we'll see baseball before June.
That's not good. But what are we going to do? When did you first realize you had a talent and a gift for writing?
Well, I think it goes back. My influence really was my father. He worked in the newspaper business as a circulation manager for New York area papers, including the New York Post a couple of times. And so from a very young age, I was in newsrooms. And I always thought it was terrific that, if you wrote something, whether it was for the school paper or whether it was for a community newspaper, which I started writing for and actually got paid for it starting at age 14, that, you have people reading your words, and there was a degree of authority and power in that, and influence. And that really struck me. And I always had a knack for writing, and the more that you write, the better that you get at it. And so at age 14, I was writing a weekly column and got pretty good at it. Went to college for journalism, Emerson College up in Boston. And a professor once told me, there's nothing older than yesterday's newspaper, but books last forever. And so that really stuck with me. And when I started writing books with that Glenn Burke book back in 1995, I really realized that, it's true. I mean, people are still buying and reading that first book I wrote with Glenn Burke, and now all these years later, a movie's in the works, and so you never know. You never know what's going to resonate with people. You never know if what you write can bring about some social change and can touch people. And I think all my books, to various degrees, have really touched people. That's worth more to me than anything, because you're making a difference in people's lives.
How did you go about? Did you want to write a book, or did the book just come about, your first book? How was that process?
Well, it's interesting. I had wanted to write a book, and had actually tried to a few years before that with Marty Barrett, who used to play second base with the Red Sox, and we had a book proposal done, and we wrote a sample chapter. These are all the things that you do. I still do it today. And when I present to my agent, and then he presents to the publishing companies, and the consistent remark we got back was, well, Red Sox Nation, they're still hurting from '86, and it's too soon to write a book about that team. When I started reading about how Glenn Burke was dying of AIDS in '94, I was like, wow, this is a great story. I contacted Pamela Pitts with the Oakland A's, who was taking care of Glenn, and she said, put together a book proposal, and we'll see if he's interested. And as it turned out, 17 other writers and 4 movie companies had the same idea that I had, and but he picked my book proposal.
Wow. Do you remember the first day that it was released?
I do. In fact, we had to self-publish because we had a publisher, but the publishing industry completely turned its back on baseball due to the baseball strike. So anything related to baseball was canned. So we had a publisher, Taylor Publishing, out of Texas, and they dropped it. And I said to Glenn, well, I give you my vow that I will get your story out there, even if I have to self-publish. And that's what I ended up doing, and I'm really glad I took that chance.
I asked this question. I just talked to Ed Hearn and Robert Lipsyte, another author, and I'm always interested when people who put themselves out there in any way. How do you deal with the reviews and the feedback, whether it's a fan, whether it's a reviewer from the newspaper? How do you personally deal with that? Good and bad.
It's interesting. Most of the reviews that my books have gotten have been pretty positive. After the Miracle, the book I just did with Art Shamsky, and I'm sure you'll get into that, but the reviews were great. It's just when you go on Amazon and you read some of the trolls that just completely misrepresent what you've written. Yeah, every once in a while, like, I'll get the urge to write back and respond. It's like, they'll make some ludicrous comment like, wow, it was just about game summaries and stats. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, it wasn't about that at all. And you read that and you're like, yeah, it's stupid and bothers you for a little bit, but you just understand that some people just live their lives to troll and to make stuff up, and they're just trying to get under your skin. But for the most part, I mean, the true publications that have reviewed the books I've written have really been positive, and I'm grateful for that. And no complaints as far as that goes.
Has the book publishing business changed since you started?
Yes, in many ways. Advances are half of what they were 20 years ago. I think publishing, the industry has really reduced staff a great deal. So you're doing more now. I mean, with Davey Johnson, I mean, I literally had to take him and I to all of our media. Because the publisher didn't want to fly somebody in from Chicago to take us from place to place, and that caused some anxiety. And I think publishing in general I mean, the last time you picked up a newspaper, or even some of the books you read today, you find mistakes. And it's because some of them don't have copy editors or proofreaders now. And it's startling. I mean, every time I pick up a newspaper, especially, it's clear that no one's proofreading. It's alarming how many mistakes that you find. So I think the industry as a whole has really cut back.
Is it still a good business for somebody who maybe is in college right now? That's their goal and dream.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if you have a love for writing, then I think you should do it. I think a person should always strive to do what they love to do, and then you're never really working a day in your life, as the saying goes. But just know that it's entertainment, really. It's very few people can make a living at this, and it's hard. It's a hard living, but if you enjoy it, then I would still say that a young person should go ahead and do it.
Could you tell me, for instance, with Art Shamsky, how does that process work? That book, for instance, was that your idea? Was that Art's idea? Was it a mutual combination?
Yeah. So the interesting thing with that book was Art wanted to do a book on the '69 Mets. He had previously done a book on the '69-'70 season, when the Knicks, Jets, and Mets all won their first championships, and so he wanted to do a book just on the '69 Mets. And so my agent came to me and said, Art wants to do a book. And I'm like, that's great, but there have been like 30 other books written about the '69 Mets. And I had written 3 books that revolved around the '86 Mets team. So I had kind of become one of maybe one of 2 authors that really focuses on the Mets. That's how it's turned out. And so I'm like, well, we need a good angle here. I mean, to separate us from all the other books that have been written about that '69 Mets team. So Art and I, we had lunch and we talked about how we were going to do it, and how we could make it different and special. And so when he said to go out and see Tom Seaver because of the condition that he was in from Lyme disease at that time, I said, well, why don't we bring some of the other players from that '69 Mets team and make it a mini reunion, since Tom won't be able to come back to New York and join his teammates there to celebrate the 30th anniversary, and we'll write about it. Like, that'll be the angle. That'll be, the heart of the book, that reunion, and the planning of the trip. And then we decide which players that we would take. So Kuzman was an obvious choice, since he was the other great pitcher on that team, along with Seaver. Buddy Harrelson was Seaver's best friend and his roommate for years on the road. Ron Swoboda, who made that incredible catch to preserve Seaver's only World Series win in Game 4 of the '69 series. And Art himself, who's known Tom for years. They both worked in broadcasting after they were done playing. So I was just going to be a fly on the wall. And then the bookends of the book would be, we would interview any living person who had anything to do with that team. So all the players, family members, media, farm directors, who at that time was Whitey Herzog.
We're going to get into that too.
We got in touch with everybody, and so worked out really, really well.
So you have that idea, and you have to present that to at some point the publisher to see if they'll approve it. And
yeah, so the first step is to take it to your agent, and he loved the idea. He thought it was great if we could pull it off. And when I say pull it off, about 50 things needed to break right for that trip to happen. You had Ron Swoboda's wife, who was recovering from cancer at that time. He was also broadcasting minor league games, so we had to work around his schedule and his caring for his wife. You had Jerry Koosman, who, was probably the easiest one, which is ironic because, he had a heart attack 20 years ago, and, he had to watch himself. And, and then you had Buddy Harrelson, who was already beginning to see the effects of Alzheimer's disease. So anything could have happened. And most of all, Tom, his wife, Nancy, told Art, well, he has good days and bad days. And you guys can fly all the way out here. And if he's not having a good day, then, you're not going to be able to see him. And thankfully, he was feeling good the day that we saw him. He took us for a beautiful 3 or 4 hour tour of his vineyard, which is, right behind his house. We went out to lunch afterwards, and it was like old times for those guys. And I was just a fly on the wall taking it all in. But I must say that personally, that was just a surreal experience. And the guys really made me feel like one of them. I mean, it was great.
Why the Mets? I'm a big Mets fan. I have my shirt on right here. But I guess that's a two-part question. First, why baseball? But then why the Mets?
Well, I think it started out with Mookie. My first two books. The first was with Glenn Burke, who played for the Dodgers and the A's. And then I did a book with Steve Glass, a Pirate for Life, who was one of the top pitchers in baseball. And then one day he couldn't throw the ball straight anymore. He inexplicably loss of able to throw strikes, which has been called Steve Glass disease, has become a part of the American lexicon, you could say. So I wrote a book with him, and then my agent called me one day and said, how would you like to write a book with Mookie Wilson? Mookie had contacted my agent, and I said, are you kidding? I'd love to. I mean, he wasn't the greatest Met of all time, but probably the most beloved Met of all time. and I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. And so from Mookie, I got to meet a bunch of the 86 Mets, and that spawned Kings of Queens, Life Beyond Baseball with the 86 Mets. And it was one of Davey Johnson's favorite books. He just loved it. And he said, you're the one that I want to write my autobiography, which I was thrilled about, because Davey just has an incredible story, both in baseball and out of baseball. And then, then all of a sudden I found myself as, somewhat of the expert on the 86 Mets. And then that evolved into the 69 team. It's funny how that works out. Art Champsky and I had the same agent. And so my agent said, do you want to work with Art on the 69 Mets book? And I'm like, yeah, but we need a really good angle. And so we came up with a pretty good one, I thought.
So it's strange how things work out too, because I went back and reread a lot of the books, and I know the Mets. So I mean, Davey Johnson plays against the Mets in 1969, makes the last out, and then he's the manager of the 86 Mets. Whitey Herzog helped the Mets bring a lot of these players in 1969, and then is battling them in 84 through 89, I believe, and go on and on and on.
The greatest of them all. I was just with Jesse Orozco a few months ago, and we were talking about it, how Jerry Koosman pitched the final out of the 69 series. Then Koosman gets traded to Minnesota for Jesse Orozco. And Orozco in 86 throws the last strike of the 86 World Series. So you had the two pitchers that were involved in throwing the final pitch of the only two world championships the Mets have ever had, getting traded for one another. So you had the Davey Johnson link with Koosman and the Koosman link with Orozco. And I mean, you can't make that up. I mean, what are the odds?
That the '69 team, and back to Art Shamsky's book, that trip for you, do you have any nerves at that time? I mean, you're hanging out with a group of players who are so close, probably don't let a lot of people within to hear all those stories. Could you appreciate it at the time?
I certainly could. I was aware of what was going on, but I wasn't, surprisingly, I wasn't nervous at all about it because, I've been around players. I've been around a lot of players from that era, which helped a lot. I had written books before. So this wasn't new ground for me. But obviously, you're in Tom Seaver's house. You're talking with his wife, Nancy. You're in his office looking at his Cy Young Awards. You're walking around his vineyard with him. He's sharing, these really touching thoughts about Gil Hodges and Jackie Robinson with you, and getting emotional about it. And you're taking all this in. You're having vodka and cokes with Jerry Koosman, in his hotel room with Swoboda and Harrelson, sitting on the edge of his bed, and you got Shamsky at the desk next to you, and Koosman's just smoking cigarettes and drinking and telling you all these great stories. I mean, it's incredible. But I had a job to do, and the job was to take all this in and to transcribe all this, and really it was like I wasn't just recording history, but I felt like to a degree we were making history with that trip.
The many things, but one of the main things that pointed out to me in the book was Whitey Herzog. So everybody who doesn't know, Whitey Herzog managed the Cardinals, the Royals. But before that, could you tell us about Whitey Herzog and that part of the book and the players that he helped bring in?
Yeah, I mean, he was totally against the Nolan Ryan trade. And I think the Mets traded Leroy Stanton in that deal too, who was a big-time prospect, for Jim Fregosi. And I mean, when I think about that interview now, it's been it's been close to 3 years since we spoke to him. That's the thing that really stands out, and how he's still upset about that trade today, and how really, he should have been the one that succeeded Gil Hodges. People were really surprised when Yogi Berra was named the manager. And, of course, Whitey went on to become a Hall of Famer based on his managing. He did such a phenomenal job with the Royals and then the Cardinals, and then became a general manager. And but people forget, I mean, his earliest days were with the Mets, with scouting, and was the farm director, and he was a tremendous part of building the Miracle Mets into what they were, and that certainly was not lost on people like Gil Hodges. Whitey, a lot of credit for developing these guys and scouting, and so Whitey Herzog is a huge part of that '69 Mets story.
And you also mentioned Yogi Berra. I think if you have not read the book with Art Shamsky, you have to just go and read the portions about Yogi Berra being the hitting coach and never coaching anything that has to do with hitting. Great stories in there about that.
Well, the thing about Yogi was he was the most notorious bad ball hitter maybe in baseball history. He wasn't a tall guy. I think when he played, he was like 5'10", maybe. 5'9", which is really small for a catcher. And I mean, he would swing at pitches out of the strike zone all the time. So when you talk about the choice for a hitting coach, and of course he doubled as a first base coach, I mean, he was probably the worst choice that you could ever make. He truly was a see the ball, hit the ball kind of coach. And that's not teaching hitters anything. You're supposed to lay off the bad pitches. It was Ted Williams who would say, get a good pitch to hit and hit it slightly up. But I mean, Berra was just like, see it, hit it. And so he was not a big help to the '69 Mets as far as hitting advice goes.
Did the guys talk fondly of him, or was it?
It's interesting. They all liked him. I mean, and they all respected the fact that Yogi Berra was a Hall of Famer, and won. I don't know. Did he win like 10 championships? I think he has 10 ring. He had 10 rings or something like that. I mean, the respect was there, but I got the sense that for his teaching ability, there wasn't a whole lot of admiration for what he could teach them. But they all liked him, obviously. Everyone loved Yogi. But yeah, I got that sense that that they really respected Gil, and they respected Yogi for what he had done and what he had accomplished as a player. Maybe not as much as a coach, and then later on as a manager.
With Gil Hodges that you just spoke about. So the one thing I took away in the book, and I didn't know fully, was how stern Gil Hodges was. He was very focused on the game, eyes out, looking at the field all the time. Maybe not so friendly to the players all the time, but he treated everybody the same, and it seems like they all respected him.
Oh my God! I mean, they were afraid of him. And it's interesting. The first year he was the Mets manager, which was in 1968. He was just kind of feeling things out. He wasn't really a disciplinarian that first year. Of course, he came from Washington, where he was successful, but didn't win a pennant with them, obviously. But in '69, they knew from day one of spring training that he really believed in the team and believed that they could have a winning record, which might not sound very optimistic. It's just, yeah, we're going to try to have a winning record. But when you look at where the Mets had been from 62 through 68, their first 7 years of existence, they had either been in last place by a long shot or in ninth place out of 10 teams by half a game. So they were really, a dreadful organization up to that point. But Gil really believed in that team heading into '69, and he had a military background, and everyone, including Seaver, they didn't want to walk by his office for fear that he would pull them in. So he ran that team kind of like a military unit, but they still loved him, and even the players that were platooned, and they had platoons at 5 positions. At first base, you had Clendenin and Cranepool. Second base, you had Boswell and Weiss. Third base, you had Ed Charles and Wayne Garrett. And in right field, you had Swoboda and Shamsky. And then at the catcher's position, they had 3 catchers. So Grody saw most of the action. But then you had J.C. Martin and Duffy Dyer, too. And so you had really... it wasn't conducive to players putting up big numbers, which back in those days, of course, would lead to bigger contracts. So these guys, it was affecting their income and their livelihoods, but they knew it was working, and they respected Gil. And Gil was just a wonderful chess master at getting guys in and out of lineups. And so they loved and respected him for that, and they loved winning. And what they pulled off in '69, of course, was nothing short of a miracle.
What do you think his Hall of Fame chances are?
If he doesn't make it this next year, he never will. There is such a fervor behind getting him in, and I think he's got a 50-50 shot. That's what I think. A lot of years have gone by, but I think I think it's 50-50. And I wish I could say it would be more. I think just as a player, I talked to Seaver about this, and he said, just don't look at his numbers, but look at the influence that he had on Jackie Robinson and making him feel welcome. Everyone talks about what Pee Wee Reese did for Jackie Robinson, but Gil Hodges was a tremendous advocate for Jackie, supporting him personally, as well as defending him to the media and protecting him against racist fans and media, and but his numbers as a player, I mean, you could make the case he was the best first baseman of the decade of the 50s, and then you add the fact that he managed the '69 Mets and turning that organization around. I think that puts him over the top, and anyone that ever played with him or played under him would agree.
On that trip, when you guys were about done and about to head back, did everybody realize that this is probably maybe the last time they're all going to get together as a group in that capacity with Tom Seaver and Buddy Harrelson?
There's no question about it. Buddy, God bless him. I saw him a few months ago, and his Alzheimer's has gotten it's progressed. It's sad. He can't sign autographs anymore, and he really doesn't speak all that much anymore. And I mean, it's terribly sad. And Tom's condition has also progressed. He's out of public life now, and I think we all realized that at the time, which is why after lunch, when we were in the parking lot talking, nobody wanted to leave. I think we were in the parking lot for close to an hour because I think everyone realized this was it. There were tentative plans to maybe get together with Tom that night for dinner, but he would get tired around 3:00 in the afternoon, really tired. And that's why we had to see him in the morning like we did. But his wife, Nancy, was phenomenal. Tom and Nancy are really lucky to have had each other all these years, and especially now.
The 1986 Mets and the 1969 Mets, both great teams, two totally different personality groups. I mean, what was your experience there?
Well, I mean, they were like night and day, and it starts right at the top with the manager. You had Gil Hodges, who was a taskmaster, a disciplinarian, and you had Davey Johnson, who was the ultimate player's manager. Stay out all night if you want, but you better be ready to play the next day. And it wasn't past Davey to fine players for making mental mistakes because maybe they were out drinking or whatever the night before, and they didn't hustle or they made a mental mistake. Well, he would fine them. So he was okay with treating his players like men, but you better be ready to play both physically and mentally the next day. But as far as the players, of course, the '69 Mets, they had a bunch of characters. There's no doubt about it. But they, they came to play. Not a lot of hangovers on that team like you had on the '86 team, and the '86 team, they had a bunch of wild guys, and that played just as hard off the field as on. I mean, one of the guys I wrote a book with was Mookie Wilson, like we talked about, and he was really one of the very few that didn't partake in all the partying. But that also was a team that was full of bravado. The curtain calls and the brawls, and teams really hated the '86 Mets. And whereas the '69 team, there wasn't that hatred at all towards them. In fact, I think at a point, every team outside of Chicago probably felt that they were really good for the game in the country, because the United States at that time and much of the world was just going through a terrible time with the Vietnam War. It was really splitting the country, and you had anti-war protests, you had racial strife, you had equal rights, difficulties. I mean, there was so much bad going on in the world, and I think the Mets saw, the world saw the Mets as something to take their minds off of all the ills that were going on in the world at the time. And I mean, we've had people write us since our book came out after the miracle, people that were fighting in Vietnam, they would listen to the Mets games on the radio, and it kind of kept them going. So I'm sorry. So you got, the question about the 86 team and the 69 team, they could not have been more different in every way. The 69 Mets were universally loved, I think, except in Chicago, and maybe Baltimore. Whereas the 86 team was just despised outside of New York.
How about working with them? Was there a difference for you?
Both the players from both those teams were phenomenal to work with.
Awesome.
The 86 team, you talk about surreal experiences, of being with Seaver and Koosman, and how about, being in Dwight Gooden's dining room, having him get emotional about some of his regrets and choices that he made, and how he could have arguably have gone on to become the greatest pitcher of all time. And as it was, he was almost 100 wins over 500, but how his addictions and his demons, kept him from maybe winning 350 games. And then, going out to Missouri and going to Darryl Strawberry's house and having him tell you how he turned his life around. And then some of the role players on that team, like Danny Heap and Ed Hearn, how Ed Hearn, had a gun to his head and was almost going to end his life because, he was this rising star, really. He was Gary Carter's backup catcher, and then he gets, the next season after 86, he gets traded to Kansas City in the infamous David Cohn trade, and he's supposed to be the Royals catcher of the future, and just one malady after another, health wise, just living the life of Job, just horrible. And so his once promising baseball career, due to one health issue after another, leads him on the doorstep of committing suicide. Everything that happened with Wally Backman, and but they were all great guys to talk to. You think about all the brawling and how tough these guys are. Wally Backman's one of the nicest people I've ever dealt with. Lenny Dykstra is, he can be charming. He certainly is kind of out of this world, and it was the most bizarre interview I've ever had. But Lenny, he was terrific, and every time I've seen him since, he's been terrific. So yeah, those guys, and then of course the '69 Mets team. I can't say enough about every single one of them. They're just sweet guys, and they love talking about the '69 season and how much they meant to them. And so it's been a great experience. And you don't always get that with every player that you interview. And it's been said, never meet your idols because they'll usually disappoint you. But I must say that in the cases of the 86 and 69 Mets, that was certainly not the case at all. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with every single one of them.
You mentioned Mookie Wilson, and I was going to ask you, somebody like Mookie Wilson and Gary Carter, kind of the outliers of that 86 team. How did Mookie deal with all that craziness going around him, as far as the partying and the drinking and the everything else?
Well, I think he just separated himself from it. He knew it was going on, but he's told me many times that he would rather go to battle with a team like that than a team of milk drinkers, because they had a certain edge to them. And I think Bobby Ojeda in the book that I wrote said it best. They just didn't want to beat you. They wanted to burn down your village. they just had that take no prisoners. They didn't want to just beat you. They wanted to, beat the hell out of you. And it was just that killer instinct that I think made them so great. They absolutely dominated the National League in 1986. They won the division by over 20 games. They almost blew it in the championship series against Houston. I think if they had to face Mike Scott in Game 7, they probably would have lost. They don't say that, or at least they don't want to admit it. But I think that's what would have happened. But they were just a terrifically talented team, and of course, they almost blew the World Series too. But they came out of that. There was just something there. There was a little bit of '69 in that '86 team. There were miracles for sure. I mean, the way they pulled out championship series and then the World Series, it wasn't just talent, but there was certainly some other elements to it as well. And I think when you write books and you're looking for great stories, those are the things that you look for. You're not just looking, like, I often get asked, well, have I ever approached Derek Jeter? Because, I live in New York, and, Jeter is such an icon, of course. And, would you ever want to do a book with Derek Jeter? I get asked that a lot. And I'm like, of course I would, but I don't think it would be a great story because, he lived such a perfect life. He had such a perfect career. He won World Series. He was MVP of All-Star games and World Series, and he never got in trouble in New York. Could you imagine? I mean, we're living in the digital age, and he was never on page 6. And so I think a bad day for Jeter would have been tripping over some supermodel's pumps on his way to getting a cup of coffee in his kitchen in the morning. Like, that's a bad day for Jeter. And so. But the '86 Mets and the '69 Mets, those are great stories.
And there's a good comparison with role players. I don't know if every championship team is like this, but even the '86 Mets, they had Backman and Tuffle at second base. They had Mookie and Lenny in the outfield. You had Howard Johnson, who's coming off the bench a lot. Kevin Mitchell, who you talk about in your book. Is that just a comparison between both those teams, or do you see that on a lot of other very good championship teams where you can just intermix players and they come out and perform?
Well, I think Gil started that in '69, and that's why the players, were disgruntled about it, because this wasn't common in baseball in 1969. In fact, I think part of Gil's genius was understanding that he had to get the most out of what he had, which really wasn't a particularly talented team outside of his pitching staff. You really didn't have any all-stars. Cleon Jones was the best position player by far. He hit, I think, 340 that season, but he was just coming into his own. He was not an all-star before '69, so Gil wanted to make the most of what he had, and I think that's why he used that platoon. And you talk about Art Shamsky. In the championship series, he started all 3 games and hit over 530 and was just destroying the ball. And yet, Game 1 of the World Series, it's Swoboda starting in right field instead of Shamsky. And in fact, Art only started 1 out of the 5 World Series games, and that was against Jim Palmer, the right-hander. Shamsky was a left-handed hitter. But I think because of what happened with the '69 Mets, other teams then began using the platoon system. The great Yankee teams of the late '70s, they had Lou Piniella alternating with both Roy White and Reggie Jackson, the righty-lefty switch. And so teams started to do that more and more. But it was not common in 1969.
With Davey Johnson and the book you did with him, which is an awesome book. So we could probably talk here all day. If anybody has a chance, read that book as well. I think what I took out of that is ultimately the Mets ownership and general manager blamed him. He became the scapegoat for the trades that they did. So they were out of his control. I believe you said that, or he said he didn't agree with many of them that were going. So Kevin Mitchell and Lenny Dykstra for Juan Samuel.
Well, actually, Kevin Mitchell for Kevin McReynolds, and then later on, Lenny Dykstra and Roger McDowell for Juan Samuel. So Davey was adamantly against dealing Kevin Mitchell. He thought he was one of the two enforcers on that team, the other being Ray Knight, another guy that Davey did not want to see go, even though, as we found out, Howard Johnson, would become a superstar, at the third base position. However, winning isn't all about statistics, and Davey knew that better than anybody, and he knew the makeup of that 86 team would never be the same when both Ray Knight and Kevin Mitchell were not returning. And Mitchell in particular, Davey felt that changed the dynamic of the team the most because, this was a guy that, intimidated other teams. He was from the streets, but yet wasn't a partier, but he knew how to handle himself. And, Mitchell, he didn't do drugs. He had nothing to do with what happened with Gooden and Strawberry, even though the front office felt like he was a bad influence on those guys, which was ridiculous because those two guys were in the majors before Mitchell. And, then Mitchell became the most valuable player of the National League in '89 with the Giants and helped lead them to the World Series, really led them to the World Series, hit like 49 home runs, I think. And so the front office was making all these moves without Davey's approval. It really cost them. And it wasn't just Frank Cashin, but it was also McIlvaine and some others that were responsible for these trades. And so it's unfortunate, but the team was never the same after '86. Now, '88, they were awfully good. They stayed healthy for the most part. And, that team was probably built to win another championship, but there was just something out of this world about the Dodgers, who I think that '88 Dodgers team, they're a very close comparison to the '69 Mets. They had the dominant pitcher in Hershiser. They had one or two others that were good. And I felt Lasorda really did the managing job of his career because not only did they beat a great Mets team, but they beat just a terrific Oakland A's team, which was far more talented than the Dodgers team. But so after '86, the Mets just didn't have that bravado that they had. It was unfortunate.
Did the players or Davey confide in you in maybe a disappointment in what should have been?
Yeah. They all felt that team was, the core of the team, which was Strawberry and Gooden, they were so young. Strawberry in '86 was 24 years old. Gooden, I believe, was 22 or 21. They were kids. Yeah. Gooden was 21 years old in '86. Think about that. This should have been a team that you would talk about being great for, the next 12 years. They could have gone on to becoming like a Yankee type dynasty. To have only won once is incredible. But the team, they, it fell apart, and it really fell apart hard after the Dykstra-McDowell trade because that '89 team, I've always felt that they gave up on the team too quickly. they would have had a shot, because I believe the Cubs ended up winning the division, and that Cubs team wasn't that great. For a division winner, they were okay, but they certainly weren't, a great team. If they had the wild card back in the 80s, the Mets would have made the playoffs 5 straight years, 84 through 88.
This is off topic of your books, but has anybody confided in you as far as what is the dysfunction that always seems to be surrounding the Mets? Whether it's an injury that nobody knows about and you never get the clear picture of it, or they let somebody go and they become a superstar, and you can go on and on and on.
I think ownership has a lot to do with it. If you think about it, they've never really had ownership that was willing to go out and get free agents. Even during the 80s, they had this policy of not going out and getting free agents. When Andre Dawson became a free agent, Davey wanted him bad, and the Mets are like, nope, I'm not going to do it. So I think for a big market team, in the greatest media market in the world, really, they think small, and the crosstown rivals, the Yankees, think big. Like, they realize that if you spend the money, you'll get it back in spades. And I think that's where it starts. But I also think that for whatever reason, they're penny wise and pound foolish. They don't put the money into development like they should anymore. Conditioning, they don't put the money into it. It just amazes me, because I think they have such a wonderful opportunity. The one thing that they did right was the new ballpark. I know people wax poetically about Shea Stadium, but Citi Field is a wonderful ballpark. I think they spent about $800 million to build it, and the Yankees spent like $1.5 billion to build theirs. And I think Citi Field's a much better ballpark from a fan experience. And I mean, they should be selling that place out every night, and they don't. And hopefully that'll change. I actually think they have a very good ball club. They just have to stay healthy, and again, that goes back to conditioning. So hopefully they'll stay healthy whenever the season resumes or begins. And I think their pitching's awfully good, and I think they've got a pretty formidable lineup and a decent defense. I think they can compete. I think in a short series, no one wants to play the Mets. I think they can beat anybody in a 7-game series.
And I agree with you. It seems like since the virus issue broke out, we've stopped hearing anything about the sale of the baseball team.
Right.
Have you heard anything there?
Well, I heard it's not over yet, but I think the Wilpons overplayed their hand. They may have talked themselves out of a really good deal, because they wanted some involvement in the club after selling the club, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, if you're going to spend whatever enormous amount of money, I think it was 2.5 billion, or
it was a lot. Yeah,
maybe even be more than that. I mean, you really don't have the right to have any input in the club. I mean, you're selling. I mean, it's like selling a Jaguar and saying, I'd still like to drive it on the weekends. You don't have that right. And I think they played themselves out of a really good deal. And it's a shame, because this could only happen to the Mets. They have this owner that's going to have unlimited resources, and is a fan, and already has a partial ownership of the club. And I mean, it would have really put the Mets on the map. I mean, it would have been a total game changer, and they blew it. And it's a shame. Maybe the Wilpons think that they finally have a chance to win a world championship again. And you look at this team, and you really can't argue with that. So maybe that had something to do with it. It's the only thing I can think of.
Well, we'll see, and hopefully we see soon. What's in store for you this year? What are your plans?
Well, I completed a manuscript on the other side of the story of '86. I did a very Kings of Queens like book with the '86 Red Sox,
Oh,
where I traveled around the country and met with the key and more intriguing members of the '86 Red Sox to kind of get their take on '86, really the good and the bad, because there was an awful lot of good that happened with the Red Sox that year. And really, that '86 Red Sox team turned around the Red Sox organization and really helped put it on a track to where it's been over the last 15 years, which, has produced 4 world championship teams. And then what's happened to those Red Sox players since? And there are some incredible stories, from Bill Buckner to Dwight Evans, with Buckner and the fallout from the error that he made, which overshadowed what was a borderline Hall of Fame career, to Dwight Evans, who lost both of his sons just in the past year, to the lifelong illness of elephant man's disease, and how Dwight Evans played his baseball career, the bulk of it, having 2 sons, going through one surgery after another, and coming to the ballpark and playing on no sleep, and that story, and then the whole Roger Clemens saga of really being in baseball purgatory, or at least Hall of Fame purgatory, after one of the greatest careers of all time because of his alleged steroids use. Oil Can Boyd and Bruce Hurst and Rich Gedman and then players like Steve Lyons and Spike Owens, who were kind of my Danny Heap and Ed Hearns for this book. So I think it's a book that needed to be written, so the manuscript's done. It's been turned in, and that book will be released in spring of 21. There was thought about releasing it this year. I'm awfully glad it didn't work out that way.
yeah.
Because this is the worst time to come out with a book, obviously, much less a baseball book. So future projects, I'm looking at a few right now, but nothing's been decided. So kind of in limbo, and working on the publicity side of the book that's going to come out next year.
Awesome. Where can we all find you? And I'll put all your links up to your books so people can go check them out. I highly recommend them.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so you can order all the books through links that I have on my website, which is erikshermanbaseball.com. It's Erik with a K, erikshermanbaseball.com. You can follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, under my name. I have a Facebook page, Erik Sherman Baseball. I have a YouTube page, Erik Sherman Baseball. So you can pretty much Google me and you'll find me. Yeah, it's a great time to read baseball books while baseball is on hold. So
Absolutely. Yeah, everybody's going to enjoy this, hopefully, and we're all stuck at home, so let's talk about some baseball.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erik. I really appreciate it. It's great talking to you.
Ryan, a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.